Okay, one final question. And we got about 5 minutes for an answer. Just probably just have one of you answer.
Yeah, this gentleman right here.
Yeah, Michael Warnken. I'm from California. I'm going to ask you. You're in the House of Representatives in Utah. I'll take it back. I'll try and keep it as simple as I can. The first argument in America was the issue of taxation without representation. Britain could lay a tax on America, and we didn't have anybody sitting in Parliament. And I think this is 1773, 1775, thereabouts. And they kept on raising taxes on sugar and tea and everything else. And by the time Parliament kind of came around and said, yeah, we really should give them, I don't know, it was something like, there were 5 million people, I think, in America, the 13 colonies. And they finally said, yeah, we should probably give them at least 3 votes in Parliament. And by the time they put somebody on a ship over to America to do that, we were already shooting. And when they created the first Constitution, they said 1 representative for every 40,000 people. And at the end of the convention, they said, yeah, 40,000 is not really adequate. 30,000 is representation, 40,000 is tyranny. And they sort of stayed up with that for a while until 1911, when they froze the U.S. House at 475 or 435 members. Population has more than tripled since then. So today, each U.S. House member has about 735,000 people. And instead of adding more reps, we now add assistants. And the number that I've come up with is we have about 50,000 assistants. So in Washington, D.C., you elect 535 people that pick 30,000 assistants, and they have another 20,000 assistants in their home district. And it was about, I don't know, 5 years ago that, maybe a few more, that Abramoff got stuck in prison. And he was this huge lobbyist. And it turned out that he didn't even bribe the congressman. He started bribing all the assistants, because they're really the ones who write the bills.
Sir, could I get you to ask your question?
I am going to ask my question.
Thank you.
I believe, I just looked up my chart, you're in a district of 36,000 people. The best state in this nation is New Hampshire. They have 1 for every 3,000. They live free or die. In California, each assembly member represents 500,000. Is it possible that all these things that we're talking about, all the federal power, may be due to the fact that each member of the U.S. House now represents 750,000 people, which is 20 times more than what our founders said they should not represent. And perhaps our problem is we need to increase representation.
Yeah, one of the things that we've postulated, imagine the difference in the Bush v. Gore if Florida was still 90% federally controlled, as it was for decades, right? I mean, for decades, Florida was sending resolutions, we're the worst off of all the western states because you're controlling all our land. If that was still the condition today, Bush v. Gore wouldn't have mattered, because they wouldn't care about Florida, because it would have maybe 1 or 2 representatives in Congress. So no, your point is very valid. I mean, when you look at what's happening in the western states and their proportionate representation in Congress, we're at the mercy. And it's not just the western states. It's not just the western states, because the western states are held hostage at any given moment when the federal government needs to grow. There's the ability to extract the votes from the west to grow whatever needs to happen in the east. When they created the states, they actually, Congress went through very detailed analysis when they created the states, and they would look at the minerals, and they would look at the landscape, and they would look at the industry, they would look at the religion, and they looked at, was there enough in that state, and how big would a state need to be to have equal proportionate representation, power, and dignity with the other states as an equal footing. And so I think your point's very valid. There is a disproportionate representation because of the amount of land the federal government controls. Now, your larger point is kind of a different question on going to the overall representation in Congress. I mean, I think you raise a great point, right? When you've got make a lot of the decisions, because it's just impossible. I mean, as a state representative, and I represent 38,000, and I don't have any staff, it's really challenging to try to be up on all of those issues. But there was something on, I don't know if you ever follow Zero Hedge. Any of you go to the Zero Hedge website, pretty fascinating. They aggregate articles. There was something recently that over the last decade or so, the 200 largest corporations funded campaigns about $6 billion. The 200 largest funders, $6 billion in. Any guess on what came out?
100% the election.
200%. $6 trillion came back in benefit from 4.4 trillion came back on $6 billion invested. 75,000% return on investment. I mean, that's a pretty good deal, right? I mean, if you can get that kind of return because you've centralized control, you've centralized the command structure, and you're really just investing in lobbying, well, that's a better return than you get by building a new product or innovating or competing. And that's really where centralizing governments have gone throughout history. You create this courtier class that all revolves around petty favors and gratuities out of a centralized government. That's where it just naturally, it doesn't matter which centralized government structure you look at, it can only go so far until you can't feed it anymore. And we're running out, there's a lot of signs that we're running out of runway in those things. So, I mean, you raise a great point. It has a number of implications for the land and then a broader point.
I would just add in a related issue, some of you may or may not know how the Electoral College, or why they created the Electoral College. Back in the day, before I was born in 1812, back in the day, it was actually to protect the cities because there were far more people living in the rural areas, and the Electoral College obviously as a completely different dynamic, but they thought it through so well that even though now that's completely flipped and the cities and the urban area, you know, certainly has far more representation, the Electoral College, it was designed to provide what you're talking about. And